The morning after they buried my husband, there were 9 buggies in my lane before the sun cleared the tree line. I counted them from the kitchen window. The women came first. They came carrying covered dishes wrapped in clean towels, chicken pot pie still bubbling under the crust, fresh bread with butter so soft it had been churned that morning, apple butter sealed in jars with the year written on the lid in blue ink. They came into my kitchen without knocking, because that is what you do. That is what community means. The men were already in the barn. I could hear them through the wall, the sound of feed hitting tin, the low murmur of their voices, the thud of split wood being stacked against the side of the house for a winter I could not yet imagine surviving. The bishop's wife sat across from me at the table and held both of my hands and said nothing. She just held them. And in the next room, someone had begun to sing a hymn, low, in German, the way we sing when no one is listening except God. The quilts arrived that afternoon. Women I had known my whole life brought quilts they had been stitching since they heard. They folded them on my porch like soft, silent promises. This is the picture, the community wrapping around its widow like a living quilt. Warm, complete, beautiful. And I am not going to tell you that picture is a lie. But let me tell you what happens when the buggies leave. If you have ever looked at that picture, the buggies, the bread, the hymns, the quilts on the porch, and wondered what it looks like from inside the kitchen after everyone goes home, stay in this room. I am going to show you what the picture holds and what it hides. And if this kind of truth matters to you, the kind that does not erase the beauty but refuses to let the beauty be the whole story, subscribe. Every person who stays is choosing to look behind the frame. And before we go further, I want to ask you something. Leave it in the comments. You do not have to use names or places. Just tell me, what was the beautiful picture you held up the longest? What was the myth you performed until your arms went numb? I will read every single one. The bread was real. I need you to hear that before anything else, because if you do not hear it, nothing I say after this will land the way it should. The community came. They fed my children. They milked my cows. They stacked wood against a house that would have gone cold without them. The church fund covered the cost of the coffin, the burial, the plain pine box my husband was laid in wearing the same white shirt he married me in 23 years before. There was no insurance policy. There was no government check. There was community, and community meant that within 48 hours of the worst moment of my life, my pantry was full, my barn was tended, and my children had been fed by hands that were not mine because my hands could not stop shaking. That part of the story is not a myth. That part is real, and I carry gratitude for it in a place so deep it has no name. I will never pretend that part did not happen. But there was another part, and the other part began on the same day, at the same kitchen table, from the same mouths that brought bread. The deacon came on the 3rd day. He sat where the bishop's wife had sat. He did not hold my hands. He held a conversation, and inside that conversation was a plan I had not been told about and had not asked for. The farm. Who would manage it now? The house. Whether it was practical for a woman alone with 4 children to remain in a 5-bedroom home built for a family with a man at its center. My eldest son Jacob, who was 19, whether he was ready to take over the daily work. The deacon spoke the way you speak when the answer has already been decided and the question is a courtesy. He said, "We want to make sure you are taken care of." He said, "We are thinking about what is best." He used the word best 3 times. Not once did he ask me what I thought best was. The casseroles were still warm on the counter behind him. The bread the women had brought that morning was still on the cutting board, and in the space between the bread and the deacon's voice, I felt something shift. The kitchen was the same kitchen. The table was the same table. But the air had changed. The warmth had a direction now. It was not wrapping around me. It was steering me. By the end of the first week, I understood. The community had not come only to grieve with me. The community had come to begin a process. There was a sequence. I did not know its name then, but I know it now. And the sequence had steps, and the steps had a timeline, and the timeline did not ask for my permission. Step 1. Assess the practical situation. Step 2. Determine the future of the farm and the house. Step 3. Begin the conversation about the dotty house, the little house beside the main house where widows and elderly parents live. Step 4. Mention, gently, the possibility of remarriage. Step 5. Wait for compliance. The community called this care, and I do not doubt that many of them believed it was care. But care that does not ask what the person being cared for actually wants. Care that has already written the story before the woman has finished crying. That is not care. That is management wearing the clothes of love. I want to tell you about something the Amish call gelassenheit. It is the most beautiful word in our theology. It means yieldedness, surrender to God's will. It means you hold your hands open and you let what comes come, and you do not grip, and you do not fight, and you do not ask why. When a woman loses her husband, gelassenheit is the frame the community places around her grief. She is expected to yield. She is expected to say, with her mouth and her posture and the stillness of her face, "It was God's time. I am at peace. I accept." And this is not cruelty, not on its face. The theology is sincere. The people who taught it to me believed it. My mother believed it when she buried her own mother, and her face was still and her hands were folded, and the community looked at her and said, "See, she has yielded. She is strong in her faith." And I believed it too. I believed that a woman's composure at a funeral was evidence that God was good and the way we lived was right. None of that is performance, and all of it is performance. Both of those things are true at the exact same time. And that is the crack I need you to see. I cried at the funeral. That was permitted. I cried that night, alone, in the bed that was too wide, with his pillow still holding the shape of his head. That was permitted too, as long as no one heard. I cried at the kitchen table the next morning, when the coffee boiled over, because he had always been the one to watch it. That was noticed. By the Sunday gathering, 12 days after the burial, I was expected to be composed. Not healed, composed. There is a difference, and the difference is everything. Healed means the wound has closed. Composed means the wound is still open, but you have learned to hold your face still above it. I held my face still. I said the words, "I am well. God is good. The Lord gives and the Lord takes away." I said them in the exact tone the community needed to hear. The tone that proved the theology worked. The tone that proved our way of life could hold a woman through the worst moment and deliver her to the other side. Still standing, still yielding, still Amish. My composure was not my grief surrendered. My composure was my grief swallowed. And the community could not tell the difference because the community was not looking at my grief. The community was looking at my face. The word "well" became a mask I tied on every morning the way I tied my prayer covering. It sat in the same place, over something private, something the community was not supposed to see. I said it at the market. I said it at the quilting circle. I said it to the bishop's wife when she squeezed my arm at the door and searched my face the way you search a field for signs of weather. I am well. 3 syllables, each one a small, clean lie. Not because I wanted to deceive, because I understood in a way no one ever said aloud, but every woman in that community knew in her bones, that the alternative to well was something the system could not hold. If I was not well, if I wept openly at week 3, if I questioned God's timing at week 4, if I sat in the Sunday gathering with tears running into the collar of my dress, then I was not yielding. I was not Gelassenheit. I was something else. Something the community had a different word for. Faithless. And faithless did not get casseroles. Faithless got watched. Faithless got whispered about. Faithless got visited by the bishop with a different kind of conversation. I had lost my husband. I could not afford to lose my community too. So I performed. I performed well. I performed surrender. I performed the myth of the woman who accepts, the woman who does not break, the woman whose faith is strong enough to hold her steady in the wind. And no one, not one person, asked me what was underneath the performance. My throat closed around the word well every time I said it. I could feel it, a tightening, a small hand inside my neck squeezing the word into the right shape before it left my mouth. That is what Gelassenheit felt like from inside. Not peace, not surrender. A hand around my throat, shaped like the word that meant I was allowed to stay. There is a house I need to tell you about. You have seen it, even if you have never been to Amish country. You have seen it in photographs, in documentaries, on the calendars they sell at tourist shops along Route 340. It is small and white, sometimes connected to the main house by a covered walkway, sometimes standing alone at the edge of the yard near the garden. It has a porch. It usually has a rocking chair. There are curtains in the window, plain, white, or pale blue, and if you look closely, you can see a kerosene lamp on the sill. This is the Dotty house, grandfather's house, the place where the older generation moves when the younger generation takes over the farm. The community describes it with pride. We do not send our elderly to nursing homes. We do not abandon them to strangers. We keep them close, on the same land, near the grandchildren, near the kitchen, near the life they built. The Dotty house is proof that we take care of our own, and from the road, from the angle of a passing car or a tourist's camera, it is beautiful. A tiny white house with a rocking chair and a garden and the sound of children playing in the yard next door. Care made visible, love made architectural. From the road, it is a picture of devotion. From inside, let me tell you what that rocking chair feels like when you did not choose it, and you are not old, and the house you built is 12 steps away with another woman's curtains in the windows. I was 44 years old. My husband had been in the ground for 26 days. The conversation about the Dotty house had started on day 9, not as a demand, not as an order, but as a gentle, practical observation from the deacon and my eldest son, spoken over coffee in my kitchen as though they were discussing the weather. Jacob is ready, they said. He and his wife Sarah, they need the space. The children are coming. Sarah was expecting their second. The farm needs a man in the main house. It is practical. It is how it has always been done. The word practical did the work that the word move could not do politely. No one said, "We need you to leave your home." They said, "It is practical for Jacob to be closer to the barn." The result was the same. The language was the kindness. The eviction was inside the language, tucked between syllables the way you tuck a bill inside a sympathy card. I packed my kitchen in the last week of that month. My daughter-in-law Sarah helped. She was gentle about it. She labeled the boxes in her handwriting, neat, round letters on brown cardboard. And I watched my pots and my canning jars and my bread pans and the blue mixing bowl my mother had given me on my wedding day disappear into containers marked with someone else's hand. I carried my husband's Bible across the yard myself. No one offered to carry it, and I would not have let them. The Dotty house had one bedroom, a sitting room smaller than my old pantry, and a kitchen with a 2-burner stove and a table that sat 2. I set the Bible on the table. I stood in the center of the room, and I could touch both walls without fully extending my arms. That night, I slept in a single bed for the first time in 23 years. The sheets were clean. Sarah had made the bed, and through the wall, the thin, uninsulated wall between the Dotty house and the main house, I could hear footsteps in my kitchen. Sarah's footsteps. Light, quick, young. The sound of my pots being placed in my cupboards by hands that were not mine. The sound of my home continuing without me in it, 12 steps away, through a wall I could hear everything through and do nothing about. The community would tell you I was cared for. They would tell you the dotty house was warm, which it was. They would tell you I could see my grandchildren from my window, which I could. They would tell you I was not alone, which, in the way they measured aloneness, by proximity, by the number of bodies within walking distance, was true. But there is a kind of aloneness that proximity cannot touch. There is a kind of aloneness that lives in the space between 12 steps and a locked identity. Between a rocking chair you did not choose, and a kitchen you can hear but cannot enter as its keeper. I went from the center of my household to its margin in 30 days. The community called it a transition. It felt like an amputation performed so gently I was expected to thank the surgeon. Then the deacon came for the second conversation. And this one was not about the house. He brought pie. I remember that specifically because the pie was still warm and the foil was folded carefully over the edges, and I thought, someone's wife made this for the occasion of explaining my future to me, and I wondered if she knew what the pie was for. He sat at my small table, the table that sat two, and he spoke in the voice men in our community use when they are delivering instructions inside the packaging of concern. There is a man, he said, a widower, 3 districts east, good farm, 4 children who need a mother. He is a steady man, a faithful man, a man the bishop speaks well of. The deacon did not say, you should marry him. The deacon said, it would be good for you not to be alone. He said, God designed woman for companionship, and a woman without a covering, without a husband, is exposed to the world in ways the community cannot protect her from. He said, when you are ready. And the words, when you are ready, sat in the air between us, like a plate placed in front of someone who has not ordered. The man was described to me in acreage. 80 acres, dairy operation, 2-story house in good repair. His children's ages, 11, 9, 6, 3. His standing in the church, good. His temperament, steady. These were the words used. Acreage, standing, steady. Not once was I told what his voice sounded like. Not once was I told whether he was kind to animals, whether he laughed easily, whether he would sit with me in silence when the grief came at 2 a.m. and I could not breathe. I was not being introduced to a person. I was being matched to a position. The position was woman in his house. Cook, mother, wife, bed. The word was companionship. The feeling was transfer. My body, my labor, my compliance, my ability to maintain a household being moved from one location to another, the way you move a piece of furniture when the room is rearranged. I was the furniture. The deacon was rearranging. I need to tell you about a woman I will call Rebecca, because that is not her name. I knew Rebecca from the quilting circle. She was older than me by 6 years, and she had been widowed twice and remarried once. Her hands were the fastest at the frame, her stitches small and even, and precise in a way that made the rest of us feel clumsy. Months before my husband died, before I knew what any of this felt like from the inside, I sat beside her at the quilting circle, and she leaned toward me without looking up from her work. Her needle did not stop. Her voice was barely above the sound of thread passing through cotton. She said, "They do not find you a husband. They find a husband, a woman." Her needle kept moving. Her posture did not change. She said it the way you say something you have carried for so long, it has become as ordinary as the weather. And then she straightened, and she smiled at the woman across the frame, and she complimented someone's stitch pattern, and she was back inside the picture. She was back inside the myth. She had named the mechanism, the precise, devastating mechanism of how widows are not courted but redistributed. And then she had picked her needle back up and returned to performing. I did not understand that moment when it happened. I understand it now. She could see the frame. She could name the frame. And she could not put it down. Because putting it down first meant being crushed by it alone. I performed grateful. I want you to understand how that performance worked, because it is the most expensive performance I have ever given, and I have been performing in one way or another since I was 13 years old. At the Sunday gathering, 5 weeks after the funeral, I stood with my hands folded, the way we are taught, and I said the words the community needed to hear. The Lord provides, and the church is His hands. I said it clearly. I said it with my eyes steady and my voice in the register that meant I had yielded. I had surrendered. I was galas in height, in a black dress and a white prayer covering. The bishop's wife squeezed my arm. The women nodded. The men looked satisfied in the way men look satisfied when the system they built is functioning as designed. And I will tell you what not one person in that room knew that morning. What not one person knew because not one person thought to ask. In 30 days, my husband had died. My home had been given to my son. My kitchen had been packed by my daughter-in-law's hands. My future had been outlined by a deacon over warm pie. A stranger's acreage had been presented to me as companionship. And not one person, not the bishop, not the deacon, not the women who brought bread, not my own son, had asked me the simplest, smallest, most human question a person can ask another person. What do you want? Not what is practical, not what is God's design, not what is best. What do you want? The question did not exist in the vocabulary of what was happening to me. And because it did not exist, I began to forget that I was someone who could answer it. I stood at that gathering and I performed grateful, and the performance was so smooth, so practiced, so perfectly shaped to the mold the community had built for widows, that even I almost believed it. Almost. But underneath the performance, underneath the folded hands and the steady eyes and the 3 syllables of, "I am well," there was a silence, and the silence was the place where my real answer lived. And no one could hear it, and it was so cold. There was one myth left, and this one I cannot blame on the community. I cannot blame it on the deacon or the bishop or the women at the quilting circle or my son or my daughter-in-law or the theology I was raised inside. This myth I built myself. I built it the way you build a fire in a house with no heat. Not because it is safe, but because the alternative is freezing. Every night in the Dotty house, in that single bed, with the wall thin enough to hear my former life continuing without me, I told myself a story. I told myself, this is how love works here. This is what community means. They carried me. They fed my children. They gave me a roof. I am not being erased, I am being cared for. The deacon is not reassigning me. He is protecting me. The Dotty house is not a demotion, it is a gift. My husband would have wanted this. God wants this. I am held. I said it like a prayer. I am held. I said it into the dark, into the pillow, into the ceiling I could almost touch from the bed. I am held. And for a while it worked. The story held me the way a splint holds a broken bone. Not healing it, just keeping the pieces close enough together that you can still stand. The story was not a lie. It was a survival architecture. I needed it the way I needed the walls of that little house. Not because they were beautiful, but because without them there was nothing between me and the winter. And then one morning, I do not remember the date, but I remember the light. It was early, it was gray, the kind of gray that does not promise anything. I was standing at the 2-burner stove heating water for coffee, and I said it out loud. I am held. And I heard it. Not the meaning, the sound. I heard the way the words came out of my mouth with the same practiced smoothness as I am well at the Sunday gathering. The same rhythm, the same shape. I heard the performance. And I understood, standing in that kitchen smaller than my old pantry, that I had been performing for myself the same way I had been performing for the community. The audience had changed, the script had not. I was holding up the frame from the inside now, not for the bishop, not for the deacon, not for the women who watched my face for signs of faithlessness, for myself, because I was terrified of what I would see if I set it down. And that morning, with the gray light coming through the one window and the water not yet boiling, I could not finish the sentence. I am held. I opened my mouth and the word held would not come. It sat in my throat like a stone, and in the silence where the word should have been, I heard the truth I had been building the myth to cover. I was not held. I was managed. I was processed. I was moved through a system that had a script for widows the way it had a script for barn raisings. Efficient, communal, thorough, and completely uninterested in whether the widow had opinions about her own life. And the most devastating part? The part that dropped me into a chair at that small table with my coffee going cold, was that I had helped. I had carried my own boxes. I had performed my own gratitude. I had swallowed my own grief on schedule. I had said I am well so many times that my throat had learned the shape of the lie without my permission. I was not just inside the frame. I was one of the hands holding it up. And I need you to understand something before I go further, because this is where the story could become something it is not. The deacon was not a villain. He was a man performing a role the way I was performing mine. He had been taught that shepherding widows meant finding them husbands, the way I had been taught that being a good widow meant accepting what was found. He was inside the frame too. He was holding up his corner. Neither of us had written the script. The system wrote it. The system handed us each our lines, and the system was so old, so thorough, so woven into the way we lived and breathed and prayed, that neither of us recognized the performance as performance. We thought it was just life. My therapist was the first person who ever named it. She did not call it cruelty. She did not call it abuse. She called it, and I need you to hear this slowly, institutional, disenfranchised grief. She said, when a system controls how you grieve, when you grieve, how long you grieve, and what you are allowed to feel, that is not support. That is the management of your pain for the comfort of the group. The distance between what you performed and what you felt, that distance has a name, disenfranchised grief. And the institution that enforced that distance was not protecting you. It was protecting itself. I sat in her office and I heard that word, and for the first time in my life, the gap between the picture and the truth had a name. Not a feeling, a name. And I need to say this because it is the truest thing I carry. The myth was not all lie. The bread was real. The coal was real. The hands that held mine at the kitchen table on the morning after the funeral, those hands were real, and they were warm, and I will never say otherwise. The community loved me in the only way it knew how, and the only way it knew how was inside a frame. The love was real. The frame was the prison. Both are true. I hold both in the same hands. If you are living in a house you did not choose, I see you. If you are smiling on Sundays in a voice that does not belong to you, I see you. If you have been told you are being cared for and what you feel is being managed, I see you. If you are holding a frame so heavy your arms went numb years ago, and you are terrified of what becomes visible when you set it down, I see you. You are not ungrateful. You are not faithless. You are not broken. The picture was never the truth, and your truth is not a betrayal of the picture. It is bigger than the picture. It always was. If what she just named has a shape you recognize, if you know what disenfranchised grief feels like, even if you never had the word, you are not alone in this room. Subscribe, because every voice that stays is another woman choosing the truth over the frame. They told me what Amish widows are expected to do within a single month. I know what they expected. I did most of it. I moved, I smiled, I said I was well. But there was one thing I refused. I refused to let the frame become the truth. And I am still here. and the frame is not.